Spooky season is upon us, and Hallows Eve is right around the corner. Let's celebrate by telling some creepy stories based on true events. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. I will be posting new videos at least 2 times a week. If you have any requests or scary stories you'd like to share yourself, feel free to comment them below. With that being said, dim the lights, wake up, you're in a coma, and let's get started. When I was about 13, my mom and dad invited round our previous neighbors from the block of flats we lived in until I was 5 years old. Anyway, I'd been sent to bed but could still hear everyone talking about this and that, until the woman neighbor said, "Hey Diggsy's mom, do you remember when Diggsy used to complain that there was someone in his room? Well, there's a family that's just moved into the floor above who have a 3-year-old son. He is complaining of the exact same things Diggsy did." This creeped me out. I had no recollection of any of this, so the next day asked my mom. Her first reaction was, "You don't remember?" Then she told me all about the weird stuff that used to happen. Footsteps up and down the hall, shit going missing and stuff. She said the final thing to happen was when she was listening to a record one day, and it started to slow down, like someone was holding a finger gently on the platter till it finally came to a stop. My mom said she snapped at this point, and started shouting, "Will you leave us the fuck alone?" As soon as she said this, the record went straight back to playing normally, and we never experienced anything again. I've never experienced anything like that since, and these days I'm quite skeptical of such stories, but I believe my mom. Strangest thing is how I found out about it, from someone else 10 years later experiencing something similar. Okay, this is 100% true even though most people I tell this to in real life don't believe me. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times and I would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally we got to the door, he unlocked it, swung it open and said, "See Therese, nothing there." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with a knife. My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her that the police were coming, and she freaked out, grabbed the knife and walked away. Police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I never slept in the living room again. Oh yeah, I forgot that after she left, my dad called and warned my crazy uncle who lived next door what was happening. Apparently he was waiting on his front porch with his shotgun when she walked by. He pointed it at her and just said, "Keep moving, bitch." Update, I just talked to my mom and she said that they never really found out the whole story, but apparently she was crazy and off her medication. Her and her husband got into a fight and she tried to attack him with a knife, but didn't seriously hurt him. When he got her out of the house, she cut herself with the knife, either trying to commit suicide or make it look like her husband did it. The police never talked to us about it, so that's just what they heard from the woman's neighbors. When I was a freshman in college, I was on a film shoot near Barstow on Route 66. We were shooting on the property of the cafe known for the film Baghdad Cafe. This property has an abandoned motel attached to it, which is where we were shooting this unbelievably bad horror film. The motel's floor was full of papers, something I initially figured was a relic from the past, while the motel was actually doing business. A while into the shoot, we started picking up the papers and reading them. They were handwritten letters from the 70s, perhaps never sent. They were addressed to dozens of different people, starting out normal, but going on to describe some really fucked up things. This was a guy who literally had some demons. He kept talking about how they were watching him and the like. The handwriting also got more and more messed up as we assembled the letters chronologically. Meanwhile, outside the motel there was a storage container with "Keep Out" spray painted on it. Naturally, we were curious. There was a hole in the side, and someone reached in and pulled out some documents. Among them was a letter, on government typeface. I think it was the VA, telling the person who wrote those crazy letters that he was unknowingly a participant of some tests of hallucinogenic substances while he was in the army. This whole time, there was a room in the abandoned motel that was sealed off, that we were strictly forbidden from entering. All the windows were covered by plywood, and the door was barricaded shut. It smelled like death. Seriously, the worst smell I've ever encountered in my life. When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet tall. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress, and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house, scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents, because when we passed by she would watch us through her windows. It was creepy and we never went alone. One Halloween one of the cousins dared us to trick or treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell and there was a lot of banging noises in the house suddenly, like doors slamming. When she answered the door, she had a severed head in her hands and we all left screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop and we knew that we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later, my parents got a phone call that the creepy neighbor lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries, and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had came up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck, and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents' and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground which had a few severed heads around it. Every time I have watched The Lion King, someone I know has died. Happened 3 times when I was a child. Always happened the same way. We'd be watching it as a family, and then the phone would ring during the movie and we would receive the news of a relative dying. No one in my family has watched The Lion King in around 15 years. My family has lived in rural Nebraska since they immigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century, disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them, as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living. This meant no wake periods. So an aunt of some unknown number of greats preceding her relationship to me dies of some disease and she gets buried in the family cemetery on the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her, so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral the 2 dogs stuck near the grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it when, a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave almost constantly. But they weren't just at the grave. They were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out. Her fingers are raw and bloody and mangled from where, on the inside of the casket door, they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. So, my mom remarried about 2 years ago. My dad died when I was 12, so she had been widowed for over 10 years. This new relationship was very whirlwind, with them meeting, dating, and getting married within 3 months. I didn't know much about the guy, but my mom was happy, so I just tried to be supportive. She moved into his house in upstate Virginia and invited my fiancé and I to spend a weekend in her new home getting to know her new husband. My mom's new home was pretty isolated. It sat on a few hundred acres of lovely rolling hills, and was very picturesque. I was nervous about getting to know this guy, but really trying to make the most of it. Over the course of our first day there though, I felt more and more uneasy. I didn't think it was weird, just silly. My mom's new husband was being very welcoming and friendly. We were being made to feel very at home, yet I still couldn't shake this oppressive feeling. I finally chalked it up to me being more upset about my mom getting remarried than I was willing to admit to myself. We spent most of the day wandering around outside since I felt worse when indoors. That night my fiancé and I showered together. When I turned my back to him he stopped talking mid-sentence and asked, "What did you do to your back?" "Well, nothing." "Why?" "You have a large bruise." I hopped out to try and see it in the mirror. I got back in and we finished showering in silence. Then it was off to bed. The one window in our room looked out over a pitch-black empty field, but I couldn't sleep until I hung something over the window. I felt sure that otherwise someone would watch us through the window. The next morning I had a complete meltdown. I woke up and just couldn't stop crying. I told my fiancé we had to leave. He tried to calm me down by telling me all the things I had been telling myself. My feelings of anxiety were just a result of seeing my mom with someone. The longer I spent with them, the easier it would become. But I just had to leave. It was only Saturday morning and we were supposed to stay until Monday, but I felt completely hysterical. I knew I was on the verge of a panic attack and my only concrete thought was I had to stop crying long enough to make our excuses and get the hell out. And we did. As soon as we were on the road, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I was even feeling embarrassed for my behavior, hoping I hadn't insulted my mom's husband by leaving early. Then my fiancé broke the silence. That bruise on your back, did you get a good look at it? I had. It looked like someone had touched the middle of my back, with their finger spread wide, and with their hand at a tilt. I want to make completely clear, no one had touched my back the previous day, especially hard enough to bruise me. Cut to 3 weeks later. My mom comes to visit me. The entire time she's hounding me to come stay with her again. After finally trying to change the subject for the 5th time, I level with her. Before I've even finished telling the story, her face is white as a sheet. She tells me she has been feeling the same way in the house. She hates it. She wants them to move as soon as possible. And the real kicker, her new husband's previous wife shot and killed herself right outside in the same field our room window overlooked.